going here.
Yep.
All right, this topic today, we're going to just, I'll just say it in a broad way, we're going to talk about Russia and what's happening today. I think Russia. That's been the topic for the last year.
Russia.
Okay, on my left, do I need to introduce him?
Better.
Yeah, better. Okay.
I'm old now.
Jesse Ventura, Governor Ventura is here. It's a real honor to have him. So glad talking about. And Jesse, you have a new show on RT coming up.
Yep, I have a show every 6:30 now on Friday night called, I have a show now on RT, Russian Television America, 6:30 on Friday evenings called The World According to Jesse.
Yeah.
And I will say this. It's mighty strange to have two parents who fought in World War II, be 66 years old, and I lived through duck and cover, and now I'm getting my free speech from the Russians.
Now, the other thing that most people don't know, talk about your son.
Well, my son has been working for RT America now for 3 or 4 years. I think he's senior to me. I don't take orders from him, though, yet. But no, he's been at RT now. He does a show called Watching the Hawks, along with Sean Stone, Oliver Stone's son. They've become cohorts and friends and all that. That's a bad combination, you know. Oliver Stone and Jesse Ventura. That's trouble waiting to happen. But anyway, he's been on there for 4 years. He's been nominated for an Emmy, and he got an award with the UN for a story he did with them. I'm very proud of him. And he acts, produces, and writes and does everything for that show, Watching the Hawks. So he's gaining great experience, but whether he can get another job if he leaves there, I'm not certain in today's climate.
Next to me, Drew Phillips. Drew, you want to talk about your background?
Is this on? I do promotional outreach and consult about Bitcoin with antiwar.com. Antiwar is a 20-plus year organization that's been covering foreign policy news from an anti-interventionist standpoint. Somewhere in late 2012, they were one of the first major libertarian-run organizations to accept Bitcoin. And we've had a lot of fun in this space playing around with crypto. And we're trying to find the peace currency. So that's really why I'm here this weekend, is to learn more about the future of Bitcoin and these other cryptocurrencies.
And we also then have Stacy Herbert and Max Keiser, and you guys have been long-term on RT. So if you could talk, Stacy.
We actually started in RT in 2009. Before that, we had worked with Al Jazeera English for their launch and BBC World. So we've dealt with all of the state-funded international news. We did start at Al Jazeera English for their launch week. And just to put into context the anti-RT propaganda at the moment, at that time there was a lot of anti-Al Jazeera propaganda pushed by the Republican Party. We had all these guests lined up for the first episode of our series for Al Jazeera. It was called Death of the Dollar, which they thought was maybe too controversial, so they changed it to As Good as Gold. At that point, we had all these guests booked, and then the headlines read, Bush and Blair, the memo reveals that they thought of bombing Al Jazeera. All our guests backed out, and we had to then go to the only people willing to appear were all libertarians. James Turk of Gold Money was one of them, and nobody else would appear. They were terrified. That didn't really have any legs. It didn't. I guess the legitimacy of the Republican Party didn't count so much on blaming somebody else. Right now, the Democrats, I believe, are going through a Goodbye Lenin moment. If you've ever seen that Emmy Oscar-winning film, it's the story of Berlin during the collapse of the Berlin Wall. This woman is in a coma, and then she comes to, and her doctors say that she's too fragile right now. You have to pretend we still live under communism. So her son erects an entire facade to pretend they're still in East Berlin under communism in order to make her feel good. I think a lot of this story that we're seeing today, this Cold War, is in order to protect a very vulnerable woman, Hillary Clinton. I think I can see why it would be a shock, that she could have post-traumatic shock at the moment. But I don't see why everybody else, why all the, I guess it's like a wag the dog moment. It's been a ratings bonanza for them, and they can't stop now. So they're trapped in this fake story in order to help Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
Max Keiser. Max, I got a question. You've been on RT for a long time, and we hear that RT is Russia propaganda. What's the difference between RT and BBC and NPR?
Well, with the BBC, it's by far the most censorship-laden of any of the outlets we've worked with. They're highly restrictive. The speech is highly restrictive. When we worked with them, they had 2 executives monitoring everything we said, every script, every guest. It was extremely draconian in their approach to speech. The environment in the UK is anti-speech. We have been curtailed by the regulator from speaking about banking issues and issues about energy companies. The regulator in the UK, Ofcom, was co-opted by an energy company in the UK to write a letter to us that we were to read on air. It's similar to North Korean TV in a lot of ways, I would say, the BBC. The PERDA laws make it impossible to talk about elections 6 months before they happen. We couldn't talk about the Brexit at all on our show without getting reprimanded by the regulators. So it's a real speech. By contrast, we haven't had any. I never hear from RT. I heard from them once to wish me a Merry Christmas about 4 years ago.
You showed your nipples.
I was restricted on RT from one time for they wouldn't allow me to show my nipples. In response to Bill O'Reilly.
Why did you need to do that?
Well, Bill O'Reilly on Fox News said something derogatory about an RT presenter, and I suggested he should bite my nipple. And so I flashed my nipple, and they took exception to this. So, you know, the propaganda that we were told, you know, I think anyone who watches our show, it's obvious the propaganda is going in the other direction. I'm propagandizing Russia. Okay, since I've been doing my show, they've increased their purchase of gold by 500 tons, exactly as I said they should. Their stance on Bitcoin has softened, exactly as I said they should. Thank you. So it's a platform for me to propagandize the Kremlin. And I told the Kremlin people, Jesse and I were at a dinner for RT's 10-year anniversary, and Putin was on stage imitating me because I ripped off my shirt once during a show. Again, people don't understand that my first job, really going back to the late 70s, I was a go-go dancer at a lesbian bar. And this a place called
How
Trudy
have the
Heller.
lesbians got along without you all these years?
I know. I asked myself. Just dip me in chocolate and throw me to the lesbians. That's been my rallying cry for decades. So I was over there, and I did this impression of David Cameron. Can I use profanity or not?
Yes.
No. So and then I ripped my shirt off, and so Putin gave a quick speech, and then he said the journalists at RT are very creative, including the man who rips his shirt off. And I got up and said, "That's my act you're doing." And then things got scary. But no, only joking. What was the question?
Well, I asked what the difference between BBC and okay, let me.
Oh, my God, yeah. Fucking
And also NPR, but I think that's
NPR.
Yeah, I mean, okay, what is NPR? What's the difference to that?
NPR is the subtlest form of propaganda of them all because it's all wrapped up. They're talking about lesbians. I mean, NPR, you know, I listen to it on the car to get the left-wing propaganda. And, you know, the thing about the left-wing propaganda is that they're going to basically hug you to death. It's like, I love you. They don't seem to think that there's any room for human dynamism at all. It's all, I hate NPR. Is that enough? Can I say anything more about NPR than that? I don't want to say anything more about them. If I can't say anything nice about somebody, I'll let Stacy talk.
I'm gonna have Jesse wants to.
Well, I'd like to add in, I don't know how many of you are aware of the awful lawsuit that I was involved in with allegedly the American sniper, Chris Kyle. It never happened. It was made up. But during the course, I won the case. I won in front of the jury. I won in front of the federal judge. But then it went to our Court of Appeals. 32 major media conglomerates of America entered that case at that point. Friendly to, they call that whatever that lawyer term is, a friend of the court or whatever it is. Yeah, that brief. And to overturn a law in Minnesota called unjust enrichment, which the law reads, you're not allowed to enrich yourself committing a crime to do it. You're not allowed to do that, to make money from unjustly enriching yourself. And the jury awarded that. 32 of the mainstream media, fake news, we'll steal that word, entered the case because they wanted that overturned, and they were successful. Even though the judges broke their own rules, because the rules state you can only argue the same theory that was argued at trial in the Court of Appeals. The 32 conglomerates came in and made a whole different argument, and these two, I call them political hacks, they go under as judges, Riley and Shepard, at the Eighth Circuit, let them do this new theory and took away my unjust enrichment. So what does that mean now to the country as a whole? It means the mainstream media doesn't have to be accurate on a story. They can run with it to make money and make all the money they can off it. And you, if you're the one harmed by it, get nothing. You're not allowed any of the compensation they make because our lovely Eighth Circuit, and it withheld all the way to the Supreme Court, because I tried and I'm ordered to go back for a new trial now. Got to do it all again. And they did other things that I won't go into that applied also, but not to apply to this discussion. What I'm getting at now is watch out even more now, because unjust enrichment they don't have to deal with. What it is, ladies and gentlemen, in layman's terms, here's the best way I can give it to you. Imagine if you went out and robbed the bank, right? And you got caught. So you went 2 years to prison for the actual bank robbery. But then when you get out, you get to keep the money.
That sounds like
That's in essence what they did with this ruling. They can now defame anyone. They can write false stories and profit from them for as much as they want, and you, the hurt or injured party, are entitled to nothing of their profits. So they don't have to fear you anymore of defaming you or doing anything like that. And we got our Eighth Circuit and our Court of Appeals to thank for that. People didn't realize the bearing my case could well have on this entire nation over when they overturned the unjust enrichment law, because the media doesn't dare have that. They'd actually have to be accountable then, wouldn't they? Because they'd have to give up some of their big money they make when they write phony stories and exploit them for a whole year like they did to me. A whole year of being exploited. I just wanted to get that out so that you all know, and that included PBS was part of that suit. You name them. New York Times, Washington Post, 32 of them. They're all came together, hired these big shot lawyers against me. And I had to stand alone, and I foot my own bill. Theirs is all paid for by insurance. And now I got to go through a new trial again that's going to cost me another $500,000.
Do we donate to your defense fund?
Hell, I don't usually do that, but yeah, I wouldn't mind it. Right, well,
Where's this QR code?
I don't know if they take Bitcoin or not. I don't know whether the courts do or not. But no, that's what I'm facing now in the in the future.
So all we hear often is that, the Russia is this sort of this country that we don't want to, the bad country. They're the ones that, has the authoritarian regime. And what we are becoming is a lot of, our enemy.
Well, what bothers me is my mom and dad both are World War II veterans. Not many people can say their mom is. My mom was a nurse in North Africa, and that predated Normandy. Anyway, though, that aside, my father had 6 Bronze Battle Stars. He fought North Africa, Normandy, Battle of the Bulge, Remagen Bridge, Anzio, and Berlin, and lived. Well, he didn't talk about the war much, but what he did talk about was the friendship of meeting the Russians in Berlin, the camaraderie. Well, excuse me. That's what I want to do at RT. I'm tired of being their enemy. It's time we become friends. We can always go back to being enemies, can't we? So where is this? Why are they seeking to make Russia the scapegoat in this, when in my opinion, Russia had nothing to do with our elections? Excuse me, we don't elect our president, the Electoral College does. So unless Russia influenced the Electoral College, this is much ado about nothing, because unless they influenced an Electoral College vote, we don't elect our president anyway. Now, that's another story I'll be happy to talk about often, because I oppose the Electoral College. But how could Russia interfere? And what we showed on my first show, and then I'll end and turn it over to everyone else, it came to me right away, really, Russia interfered in our election. I was curious as to how many elections we've interfered in. And I thought they made the statement that interfering in our election was equivalent to an act of war. And I thought, how many elections have we interfered in? Well, I found out the Mellon Carnegie had done this huge thing from 1948 to 2010. So we're not even counting the last 7.5 years. That's out of the equation. From 1948 to 2010, the United States has interfered in 81 elections in 45 different countries throughout the world. Now, if that's an act of war, then there should be 45 countries out there declaring war on the United States of America today. So where the hell, that's why I'm on this station, to point out hypocrisy. Where the hell is the hypocrisy in that? We're crying because someone may have interfered in our election. I'll finish with this. Anybody here change their vote because of the Russians? Anyone? Hands?
Which would
Nobody.
be Hillary's emails. Reading Hillary's emails, were you suddenly shocked that she
The
was so
thing is,
corrupt?
here's the deal. They're using the classic kill the messenger, not the message. Yeah. The message is the Democratic Party was fixed. And Minnesota was the prime example. It went overwhelmingly for Bernie Sanders, and yet our 2 super senators voted for Hillary, Franken and Klobuchar. And they carried more weight than all the other delegates. After Minnesota went for Bernie Sanders, Hillary ends up getting the better of the deal. If that ain't fit, we should be thanking the Russians for if they did it, for exposing the fraudulent of our election system so that we now have an opportunity, hopefully, to fix it. And I'll give up the mic now. I'm done.
Let me bring Drew here into the discussion. One of your slogans is "Bitcoin's not bombs." How do we become more of a flagless currency and get away from this sovereign control?
Flagless currency, I like that. So you're talking about the BRICS and the emerging superpowers. So if if these countries think they can use cryptocurrencies as a way to break U.S. hegemony, then they will. China wants China coin, right? They want to regulate it so tight that these governments want to take control of their people's money. But that's a double-edged sword. Cryptocurrencies teach people not just to take control of their money, but to take control of their own data. And so you can give them a highly regulated currency, but the Chinese people already have a taste of this, and they've seen the power of it. So I think that it's, I think they will. I think we're seeing that India, China, and elsewhere, cryptos are exploding. And in relation to war, we have this situation going on in Venezuela. Sanctions, that's an act of war. The Venezuelans are mining at the risk of being arrested and thrown in jail not because they have a philosophical alignment with Bitcoin, but because it works better, because their currency is in decline, because fiat doesn't work. We don't have to necessarily convince them that crypto is a better currency, a flagless currency. They're just going to naturally gravitate it as their fiat currency collapses.
Max, you said Russia is sort of emulating some of your ideas. Is Russia the new home for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency? Where are they at that?
That's an interesting way that the cryptocurrency Bitcoin market is evolving right now, because the attempts by China to cut down on Bitcoin, which makes sense because China, of course, is authoritarian, and this is a challenge to state power, and so it makes sense that they would want to try to ban Bitcoin. And the market's just moving to Japan, moving to South Korea, moving to other territories. So it's a bit of a whack-a-mole situation. These countries can try to ban it, but the way that the network is set up, it's, as Talib Nassim would say, anti-fragile. There's no single point of failure. And so this is, in my opinion, what we're seeing here is the collapse of the nation state as a model of governance. The printing press was instrumental in the collapse of the church in medieval times, because information became disseminated more easily than before. The monopoly of information was broken. Shortly thereafter, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the church as a power was in decline. Here, a similar technology, in this case, the blockchain, the distributed network, is going to basically cut into the powers of the nation state as we know it. So it makes sense then that a state like China is the first to feel the repercussions of this. In Russia, I think that they are kind of on the fence about this. On one hand, they have been struggling for years to escape the U.S. dollar hegemony by cutting deals with other countries to trade outside of the U.S. dollar, because the U.S. dollar is the world reserve currency. It gives them a special place in the global economy. The U.S. empire is an empire not necessarily of guns, but of debt of the U.S. dollar. The U.S. empire lends money to countries, and when they can't pay, they kill people, essentially. That's the U.S. empire. And so to get out of that, if Japan, for example, if they want to buy oil, they have to buy U.S. dollars first, because oil is traded in dollars. All commodities are traded in dollars. So it's a remarkable way to extend influence by using the U.S. dollar. And the U.S. dollar itself is controlled via the central bank, and the central bank of the U.S., working with global central banks, have allowed the debt in the globe to reach 300% of global GDP. So the global GDP is roughly $70 trillion. You've got 3 times that amount in debt, and it's an instrument of enslavement. They say the currency of kings is gold, princes is silver. When you get down the list, and the currency of the slave is debt. And this country is being indebted through the high cost of healthcare, high cost of education. The central bank says there's no inflation, and yet the healthcare and education are skyrocketing in price. But they don't count those in the calculation when they determine what is or not inflation, because they don't want to raise interest rates, because that would mean people who have savings would get a return on their savings. They would have individual sovereignty of their own capital. They don't want that. So Bitcoin is a way out of this mess. And it's reached a point in its evolution where it's taking on the state. If China doesn't want to be part of the, I said earlier, I guess I was being a bit cheeky. China grew on the back of the currency manipulation that's been going on since Bill Clinton allowed the World Trade Organization to accept China and America to outsource labor to China, and no wages in America for these amount of decades, no purchasing power increase for American workers in 30 years. China now has a middle class. And so Chinese growth is made in America. I hear voices, I hear angels. I'm being taken away. This is the end for me. I've summarized my views so brilliantly that I'm ready now to die. So I see St. Peter now. He only accepts Bitcoin, apparently. You can take it with you. My God, I am rich, but I'm dead. Wait a minute, no, let's come back to reality. So central banks are also challenged. Look, it's amazing that if banks want to manipulate prices, they can do so. In the gold and silver market, gold has been, even though you have this high inflation, gold's been not doing much because the banks are easily to manipulate the price of gold using derivatives and everything I talk about on my show. So why is Jamie Dimon suddenly bad-mouthing Bitcoin? It's because there is no infrastructure for the price of Bitcoin to be manipulated by Jamie Dimon. So he has to go on CNBC and make a total asshole of himself, expose himself as the weakling, the intellectual pygmy that he is, the financial terrorist that he sponsors and is a part of, the hundreds of billions of dollars in fines he's paid, corrupting the system, corrupting the economy. There is only one man that you could, without any equivocation, say is responsible for the decline of the American economy on behalf of a cartel of global oligopolists and financial terrorists, and that man is Jamie Dimon. There's no deterrent for financial terrorism in America. We have a death penalty in America. Why not use it appropriately? Some poor kid down south is caught with a marijuana stick, talking to Jesse probably. And he's on death row. That's not a good use of the death penalty. I have a much better use. Anyway,
Let me add, Minnesota never had the death penalty, and as governor, I was so happy because I didn't want to make that last signature.
Oh, yeah.
I was so pleased Minnesota isn't barbaric, and we don't have that. And as a governor, I was very happy not to have to sign anyone's death over. Would have been a hard thing to do.
Well, we're talking about Russia, and Stacy, I wanted to bring you into this discussion. Most people watch the show, Max Keiser, Stacy Herbert on their show. We hear a lot about BRICS, and I think a lot of times I at least have the question and would like to know how the BRICS are up and coming. They're becoming their own force. How does Bitcoin fit into this? I want to know more about BRICS.
Well, I guess I'm going to tie it all to the opening of the show and what Max just said, that you see a lot of projection going on by the Western elite their power is crumbling. They are projecting onto Russia, for example, that it's Russia, it's this Superman Putin who is everywhere. This guy is like a god. He can destroy us. He's delegitimized our institutions. They're projecting that they themselves have delegitimized our institutions. They are the ones that have corrupted the political system and the banking system. Bitcoin was birthed out of that. It came into being as a result of the bailouts of the banks that they orchestrated. They orchestrated the situation where we have a nation that is a basket of deplorables, according to them. These are people who have been decimated by not only opioid addiction, by their Connecticut, billionaire family, opioid-pushing family, but they've been decimated by all the trade deals that they said, just trust us. You know, everything will be fine one day. And everybody sat back and trusted their elites and said, okay, one day we'll be all great. 40 years later, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. They're the ones that delegitimized it. Jamie Dimon saying Bitcoin is a fraud. Well, I'm sorry, but JP Morgan is the biggest fraudulent bank on
Amen.
earth. So why he's projecting onto the system. What both of those projections indicate is that they're very worried about the people of the world that have been united via things like social media, via things like their own individual sovereign currencies like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, that they have way too much power, the ordinary person. And how do we get them to distrust all of that freedom they have and trust us instead and keep on giving us all their power? So the BRICS nations, I think, you know, the fact that they don't have powerful banks. People ask us all the time, why don't you talk about Russia? Well, first of all, we talk markets finance scandal. The big banks that can mess up everybody in the world tend to be American and British. Some French banks, some German, and a few Italian banks have international pull to defraud everybody in the world. Their banks are small. Chinese banks are mostly small. Certainly their financial services industry around the legacy banking systems that we have here are not as powerful and into everybody's lives around the world. So I think the fact that they don't have a legacy system leaves them in the prime position for this next phase as this US dollar debt system collapses. They don't have any US dollar debts. They don't have any, you know, they could start anew. They don't have all these JP Morgans and Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and Citibank and Bank of America and Wells Fargo, all these fraudulent entities to prop up. So they could just let it go and start anew.
What are the BRICS countries?
Oh, Brazil, Russia, India, and China.
South
America.
And South Africa, yeah. All big gold producers other than Brazil, but they're big commodities producers.
Okay, well, you guys sort of talk, I mean, you talk to people now. One question I have, because obviously gold and commodities back this, and they're banking on this. How do they, I mean, we know what happened in China. I guess the heart of the question is, how are they perceiving Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies? And are they seeing it possibly as like Russia becoming more of a safe haven?
Well, it's not a threat to them. It's more of a threat to the U.S. Dollar and banking system.
Okay.
I would, from my observation, maybe I'm wrong, but I would think that it's not a threat to them. When we used to go to Bitcoin conferences, the first one in Prague in 2011, I believe there had been a meetup in New York where somebody spent 10,000 Bitcoin for a pizza, but we went to the first Prague Bitcoin conference in a dilapidated building in Prague that was organized, and back then it was just like 5-10 people sitting in a room talking Bitcoin, and now it's a big major international thing. But at that point, all of the biggest guys in mining Bitcoin were in the ex-Soviet states, Ukraine, Georgia, Russia, because they had subsidized gas prices. So energy was cheap for them. That's the biggest cost for Bitcoin. Now in China, I guess they're allowed to twofold. It's easy to steal energy there, I guess, so a lot of people steal it. But also the government, with their centralized command and control, they did produce way too many dams, so they have more energy than they need. So they were just like giving it to these people. So whoever had in terms of gold, people, if you need to find a gold deposit and have a gold deposit to extract it. So if your nation is lucky enough to have gold or lucky enough to have oil, then you become wealthy in that. Here, it's your energy costs. So whoever is lucky enough to have low energy costs, they can rule the mining space.
I think there's been there seems to be a big change happening in terms of the states and their reaction to Bitcoin. So I think I'll make this kind of prediction, is that I think we're entering into a new, what you could call space race. Remember when the Sputnik went up, suddenly the space race was kicked off. And the U.S. put huge resources behind it, and this was brought in this modern age, this digital age. It gave birth to Silicon Valley in a huge way, which is the powerhouse of the American economy, was the space race. So I think what happens is at the moment, central bankers are starting to look at Bitcoin as a strategic reserve and as a storehouse of value. So that I think that we're going to start to see countries kick off a bit of a Bitcoin mining competition, space race. That there's only 21 million available in total supply, and he who has the most Bitcoin is going to win. It used to be said about gold, but gold is becoming less of a strategic reserve. And so countries like China, for example, could very well do a flip-flop, or their approach could be to try to just get the state could take over the mining, the independent miners, because they see that this is the way forward in terms of the geopolitics. The American government could say, we're going to subsidize mining because we need to accumulate millions of Bitcoin as soon as possible, or else as part of this new geopolitical reality of this new strategic reserve, this new standard of currency, this new asset, and other countries would follow suit. So I think that's where and we've already seen it on the smaller scale. The miners play this out all day long as the gestation and the growth of Bitcoin over the years, the game theory aspect that's built into the protocol works brilliantly. This is what makes it the genius technology that it is. The incentive are balanced that no one can monopolize. And so I think it's going to kick up to the geopolitical level, which would be fascinating. Now, again, I'm on RT, I talk, and we have international broadcast, and I put that message out there. And if it becomes the reality of the situation, a lot of Americans come to me and said, how come I didn't hear about you recommending Bitcoin at $3? It's because your American government has been censoring me. So as a result, your financial well-being got fucked. So don't complain to me, complain to your congressman. Complain to your, if you don't want competition in the media space. America is built on competition. RT is just competition. It's in English, It's in English. It was a language presumably used in this country. If you don't like what you hear or you have questions, watch somebody else in English and get a different point of view. No one is, holding you down and waterboarding you. It's not a Guantanamo Bay of media. It's like you have ears and you have a mind, It's competition. If you have Morgan Freeman saying we're at war with Russia, it's because NBC, CBS, ABC don't want competition. They don't want those eyeballs watching anything else but their shit. Okay? That's anti-competition is anti-American. Okay? That's anti-American. Don't call me anti-American because I'm competing in America. I am American. They're anti-American. You know what I'm saying? That's not America. I'm sick of people calling me anti-American. I've been here for 300 years as family. Fought in every fucking war except for Vietnam War.
I got you covered there. I got you
war.
covered there.
Yeah, we'll see about who's anti-American. Meet me out back. We'll settle this thing with mano a mano.
Well, Jesse, talking about RT, obviously
Yep.
you're now in it. You're getting ready to launch a show.
Already launched it.
You're launched it. So you're out there promoting this on RT, and we're now hearing how this is. All we hear is RT. It's propaganda. It's this. When are we going to get past this?
Well, to me, it's called use common sense as a society and take a look at RT's lineup. Myself, Ed Schultz, and Larry King. Who the hell's more American than us three? I mean, take a look at us three. We've all been on the networks, all the different ones, many times over, and how dare them say that? I mean, as I said, I come from a family where everyone in my family served at a time of war. I would like to ask, what's the matter with Donald's strapping boys? How come they're not in the service? I'll make this statement. I spent 6 years in the military. I never met one rich person. My entire time in the military, I never met anyone who was a millionaire. Now, what should that tell you? The millionaires ain't the ones fighting. The poor people are, like normal, like it always has been. So for me, RT has been a savior for me. I'm banned on mainstream media because I ask and say things they don't want to talk about. I had a show called Conspiracy Theory. I got read off on the floor of Congress, for cripe's sake, you know, for doing it. That particular one was when I exposed the 6 FEMA internment camps that they've built around the United States. And, you know, and questioning who's going in them. You know, who's the lucky people who get to go on vacation here? And, you know, and in doing those shows, it showed me greatly the censorship we live under in America today. We're supposed to be home of the brave, land of the free. And like as I said earlier, I find it ironic that it's Russian television giving me my free speech today. And it's Russian television not telling me what I can or can't talk about. For those of you that don't know, when I came out of office back in '03, I was the hottest commodity out there. I was the voice of the independent, and there was a bidding war that took place between Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. MSNBC at that time, they were Fox Light, if you remember back. This is before they made the liberal switch. And MSNBC won. I signed a 3-year contract with them. And I proposed to them, I said, look, let's do the show with a Midwestern perspective. All we get are the coasts. Nobody's coming to us from the heartland. And to me, that's where real America is lots of times, in the heartland. I'm from there. And so they agreed, we'll do it in Minneapolis. We're putting the whole show together. MSNBC's putting it, they're doing it all. I'm just ready to perform. All of a sudden, we got a phone call. Now, I'm going to tell this story because I think you'll enjoy it. And the phone call to one of my subordinates who had actually worked with me 4 years at the Capitol and was now working with me on the TV show. The phone call went as this. Now, bear in mind, this is '03, spring of '03. Is it true Governor Ventura doesn't support the invasion of Iraq? And my subordinate said, oh no, he's vehemently opposed to it. The other end says, does Connecticut know about this? Or wherever the headquarters of MSNBC, Jersey, Connecticut, I can't remember now. Does Connecticut know about this? And my subordinate said, I don't know. Another pause, and it was, do you think there's any chance he changed his mind? No, this is a true story. And my subordinate said, I don't think so. He said, I worked with the governor for 4 years, and you need some real compelling reasons for him. He's pretty set in his ways when he has his opinion. Well, lo and behold, people, I was never allowed on the air. My show got bumped. And now they had me. I'm handcuffed, and I have tape across my mouth because I believe in contracts. I signed a contract that said I can't do any other cable or news shows. In essence, they paid me the entire 3 years and bought my silence. I couldn't do anything. So you notice from '03 to '06, there was no Jesse Ventura because I had been bought off. Well, at the same time, going on in MSNBC, they had just brought Phil Donahue on board. Remember that? Mm-hmm. When they brought daytime's big man, Phil, was on board. Their highest rated show. Well, Phil was with me. He was likewise opposed the invasion of Iraq. Phil, you're gone. So Jesse Ventura and Phil Donahue were taken off the air or not allowed on the air by our mainstream media simply because we were going to speak out opposing the invasion of Iraq. Think back. Nobody was opposing that, were they? Nobody. Why? Because they weren't allowed to, because the orders came down to our supposed free media, our supposed mainstream media. And what happened? They censored. I wasn't let on. I will make it a happier note to finish on. When you live in Mexico, they like to name their houses, if you've ever been down there. It's called Casa, whatever it is. I gotta tell you, I came within an eyelash. I didn't do it, but I came within an eyelash of naming my house Casa MSNBC. They bought it, you know. And, well, they paid me for all 3 years. And believe me, it was a nice contract, kind that pro athletes get. Kinda, not quite where some of them. I mean, I'm not going to say I'm with Steph Curry, but it was a nice contract. Never earned a dime of it. They just paid me off for my silence and had me, because I got to honor the contract, they had me silenced for 3 years. And then it was then that I came out, and then lo and behold, along came conspiracy theory. So I bet you they wish they would have silenced me for about 6 years instead of allowing me 3 years of that show on the air.
But in terms of the media landscape, it's
Yep.
quite interesting. I had mentioned we were at Al Jazeera English, and they were launching in 2005. They had begun working on it, but that was the only place you could go to voice opposition to the Iraq War, and lo
Yep.
and behold, what do? They tried to demonize them, a propaganda campaign against Al Jazeera here in the United States that was very effective, and it still is. It's why Al Jazeera America partly failed, is that there was such successful propaganda against them.
Yeah,
But here
and-
now it's the same.
Let me
It's
add
like,
into you. That's what you better pay attention to. What happened to Al Jazeera, they're now trying to do to RT. So be aware of that.
yes,
Be aware of that.
I think probably what it is RT is very strong. I believe in exposing like kind of the corporate ownership of many institutions of ours, whether it's our politics or our banking system or our media. So I think that's what they want to shut down.
Yeah, just to the point of 2003, you said, all the media was silenced. You're talking about Al Jazeera and Jesse's show. 2003, March, the lead up to the Iraq War, was probably the largest, in my lifetime anyway, largest anti-war protest the world has ever known. And since that time, we've seen nothing of the sort.
They didn't even show the protests.
Well, correct, right. The media, silenced the whole thing. But I was there. I bet many people in this room were there in the streets at that time, March of 2003. And what we've seen since is, the clampdown the media's control. They've been able to silence, to show the effectiveness of those protests, to show the outrage of people. And now we have this sort of new technology, social media and such. And something we've worked on at Anti-War is really, like, the days of sit-ins are over, right? So we need a social media sit-in, or we need like a social media protest, or whatever way we can allow people to express themselves that can't be censored, so that people don't feel alone when they hold this opinion of, I'm against war. And so many people, I think, live in such a small bubble because of the media that they don't realize that their neighbor holds these same opinions. So I think that's why it's important that you guys are out there. And I think it's grossly ironic that Russia gives you that platform. The Russian propaganda arm gives you that platform.
What's interesting is I've said to many people about, hey, I want to try being friends with Russia. I can't tell you how many people out on the street look at me and so do I. I would like that too. And I look at people and say, we've been enemies my entire life, and I'm 66. Let's try friendship for 5 years. We might get something done. We might accomplish something. We can all be enemies again. That's easy. It's easy to be an enemy. Let's try, that's what I feel. I want to be Russia's friend. Let's see what it's like. What could happen after all these years? What could we accomplish if we teamed up with Russia? What could be accomplished? And they're doing a lot of great things. I mean, Putin's banning GMOs. They want to be the organic food supplier of the world. I think that's a good idea. And I'll go on the record and say this right now. I'll be bold and brash. Between Hillary, Donald, and Putin, I think Putin's the best leader of all three. No, I mean on sheer leadership. People have said to me, because I met him, what is Putin like? And I said, the best way I can describe him, he's a patriotic Russian. Shouldn't the head of Russia be a patriotic Russian? Just as the head of the United States should be a patriotic United Statesian. By the way, I try not to use the term American. There's Central America, there's South America, and there's North America. My civics teacher, Linton Lang, in high school taught me, we're United Statesians. We're not Americans, so I like to use that term. And Mr. Lang passed a few years ago, but his thought of United Statesian carries on through me. That's what he taught me in high school. We're not Americans, we're United Statesians.
And Native Americans.
Right.
They're-
But, well, they should be native United Statesians.
Yeah.
Not Native Americans, native United Statesians. There's North America, South America, Central America.
All right, our session is coming to an end here. I think we can say it's been a lively session. So I want to thank our panelists for coming up here.